and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne, and this is my weekly reading vlog. My vlogging started last week when I was at a prayer retreat called a ladies' prayer advance with some ladies from my church. So we're gonna get started with a montage of clips from that. It was a wonderful time away. And then I will get right into my reading updates and the things that I read and my thoughts about them. And also I go into kind of a bit of a lengthy discussion here about my thoughts about moralizing or preaching in a story, however you want to call it, and what's good and bad about it and how I feel about it. Kind of just answering a question more fully that Penny asked me in, I think it was last week's reading vlog. So let's just go ahead and get started because this is kind of a longish one. So I won't waste any more time chit-chatting. Let's go. To everyone out there in booktube world, it is Monday evening and I wanted to film a clip updating on my weekend and what I have been reading. So first of all, the weekend, if you remember, last week in my weekly reading vlog, I mentioned that I was going to a prayer advance, as they call it, and it was a wonderful time of praying and worshiping, spending time with some ladies from my church, drank a lot of coffee, as I'm sure you can imagine, and did a lot of praying, did a lot of crying, did a lot of singing and listening to the word, and it was wonderful. There were some, they always have a bookshop there, and they sell, you know, some carefully curated books, and I saw quite a few that interested me, that caught my eye, but I have so much Christian nonfiction at home that I already own that I need to read that I wasn't even tempted to pick up most of them. However, I did add some to my Goodreads TBR and put them on my radar. Once I've read down my shelf a little bit, there's so many more that I want to read, but they had some great titles there. One that I did end up getting, because I've not seen it anywhere else, and it's not one that I think is as readily available, is called A Practical Guide for Praying Parents by Edwin W. Lutzer. Short little book published by Moody Publishers. And my husband and I are going to read it together. And it has short little chapters. And it starts with information, exhortation, readings for the parents, and chapters that end in prayers. But then the second half of the book, and it's like ways that you can pray for your children, the things that you should consider praying about, that kind of stuff. Like the first half is informative / devotional, whatever. But the second half actually puts you on a weekly schedule kind of, and gives you daily prompts and areas in which to pray for your kids and ways to pray for them in that area. And so I thought that would be a really excellent thing for my husband and I to do, to get in the habit of together praying through that schedule on a weekly basis for our kids. Anyway, I picked up that book, and that's the only one that I ended up buying. I did notice, I don't know how many of you have been following along with the Power Through Prayer read-along that we did in March with Tiffany at Beautiful Minutia and Kelly and Dia. It was a really great book by E.M. Bounds, Power Through Prayer. And they actually had 2 different copies of it available at the prayer advance that I went to. So a good sign. So I am currently making dinner, if you are wondering what I'm doing. So apologies if I get a little distracted. I'm using a knife right now, so I should probably pay attention to what I'm doing. Reading updates. I finished reading The 5th of March, which I have right here to show you. The 5th of March by Rinaldi. Now, Rinaldi is a historical fiction young adult historical fiction author, whichever is the correct order to put all those words. And I read 1 or 2 of her books when I was a teenager myself. I'm pretty sure I read one called Time Enough for Drums. I don't remember much about it. I do remember that my sisters really enjoyed that one. I know I remember seeing other ones. I've picked up a few of her books along the way because I kind of want to revisit and see how I feel about her writing. Her books are, shorter, easier historical fiction reads. A lot of them are about American history, so that's interesting. So I read this one, The 5th of March, which is about the Boston Massacre that took place in 1770. And that caught my eye because we went to Boston about a year ago on spring break. And we saw the spot where that massacre occurred. And it's, one of those interesting moments in American history that, there's a lot of layers to what all went on there. I have really mixed feelings about it. There were some things I felt like she did really well. I don't know if you remember me talking about The Paris Dressmaker by Christy Cambron, which I read recently, which was historical fiction set in Paris at World War II. And I talked about how she kind of showed that in war, things can be a little messy, and we have to remember to be mindful of the fact that people on the other side, the enemy, so to speak, is human too. Like, we have to be mindful of the humanity of people on the opposing side. And I feel like Rinaldi was really emphasizing that as well. So it's interesting, when you read, this happens to me a lot, when you read books in a row that kind of tackle the same sort of idea, but in a different way, from a different perspective. So I found that interesting. It's not like, a propaganda sort of book that is portraying one side as wholly good and the other side as wholly bad. She was definitely examining the various aspects of the situations that led to the Boston Massacre and the actual Boston Massacre, and what the record of history says, what the people were saying at the time, and who was to blame. And, it was kind of, a combination of factors and a mix of things that went down there. And so she does a good job of evaluating all of that and being honest and forthright about all that, and tackling it all head on, and not avoiding any of that, and not just brushing over the ways that the Bostonians behaved that were not right, and the ways that the British soldiers behaved that were not right, and then the ways that both parties, the things that they did that were good, and the values they espoused, etc. So it was good and balanced in that way, so I appreciated that. However, the main character I felt was very inconsistently portrayed. She wasn't a fully fleshed out character. Now, she was a young teenage girl, and there was definitely like a character growth arc there. There were lessons that she needed to learn. There were, there was an aspect of coming of age. So I get that she's, learning as she goes, and she's changing and she's growing, but she was very inconsistent. And, on a given day, I bet a teenage girl is probably pretty inconsistent, and, one day she's going to have a certain perspective and the next day it's going to be totally different. However, it doesn't make for a good novel. It makes for a very inconsistent novel, and a character that you don't really feel like you're getting to know her, and her changing, shifting points of view. On one page she's saying one thing, and then on the next page she's saying something totally different, and there's no explanation for the change in perspective. It's almost like it didn't happen. So that aspect, I felt like it was not really very well written. And then the other thing that I disliked was, I feel like the author had some, good points that she was trying to make. She was tackling some themes of like liberty, and what is liberty, and independence, and what does it look like in different people and in different ways, and what are the limits of it, and all of this stuff. She's tackling some pretty heavy themes, and not in a heavy-handed way, in an appropriately young adult sort of fashion, but just the way the story went, the way she took the plot, I felt like her points could have been made in many different other ways that would have been better. The main character makes some choices and does some things throughout the course of the book that honestly just don't make sense and don't need to have happened. There was one other thing that I disliked, and that was, so there's this relationship that develops between our main character and a British soldier, a young British soldier. And that's all well and good, but the way the British soldier's character was portrayed, there were a lot of questions about the nature of his actual character. And I don't feel like we ever get fully fleshed out. Like, do we ever really know this guy? And the choices that our main character, the girl, what even is her name? I just read the book. What even is her name? Rachel. Our main girl, Rachel, she makes some sacrifices and she makes some choices to help this British soldier. And it's like, should she have? Was that the right thing? You don't really ever know. You're not ever able to make a good decision because you don't feel like you ever really know if he was a good guy or a bad guy. And there are some things he does that make you feel like he's not a great guy. And there are several people in the story who straight up tell Rachel, he's not a good guy. He has this reputation. He did this thing. And she's like, well, I don't see it. So, but then he does some things, says some things to her that make her uncomfortable. But then she doesn't agree with the other people. Inconsistent characters. And you don't feel like you really get to know them and get a good handle on who exactly they are. And therefore, them having a relationship, and also the relationship was inconsistently defined. The author was saying that it was a friendship, but then other times it felt like Rachel had romantic feelings. He definitely was interested in her in a romantic sort of way. It just was inconsistent and also not a good, healthy relationship sort of thing. There were issues there for sure that were not necessarily fully presented as being problematic. So I didn't love that. So mostly disappointing. And in the end, I gave it 2.5 stars. I did enjoy the setting. I enjoyed the setting of being in Boston and the colonial times. I love how she really put you in that place. She had, actual historic buildings and places and events and people. And she really immersed you in that setting. So that all was well done. Great job. I enjoyed that aspect of it as well. But that wasn't enough to offset the flaws in the writing. So in the end, I think I settled on 2.5 stars. But I'm going to read more by this author because I was reading reviews on Goodreads and a lot of people were saying, this is not her best. Like, I read, she has some really other great books that are really good. This one is not a good indication of her abilities. And so I'm definitely going to keep reading the ones that I have at least. But I would say she definitely does not compare to Rudis Sepetis. Rudis Sepetis is like, if you're looking for YA historical fiction, Rudis Sepetis' books is, leagues ahead of at least this one. So that was that. So I finished that yesterday, which was March 30th. So just in the nick of time to finish my Read Your Bookshelf Challenge book that fit the prompt of time for Chantel's challenge because the title was the 5th of March, which is a date. So I figured that went with time. And the other book that I still need to finish for March, and it's March 31st. I don't know that I'm going to get to the end of it because I'm about 2/3 of the way through. And that is Jack and Jill by Louisa May Alcott. And so I'm about 2/3 of the way through and enjoying that reread of it. Now, I did want to answer questions. So Penny had asked me a great question in the comments in my last week's weekly reading vlog, because I was talking about how Louisa May Alcott has a lot of moralizing in her stories. And Penny's question was, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically the idea is, how is moralizing bad? Isn't it good? Isn't it a good thing to have good, strong morals in a story? And yes, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. I just want to clarify my thoughts a little bit more, maybe articulate a little better perhaps what I mean. I don't think that there's anything wrong ethically, morally, biblically, spiritually, etc., however you want to put it, in having a moral story and having a story with a clear-cut moral that is brought out in the narration of the story, and that is done in the way that Louisa May Alcott does it. In this book, basically every chapter ends with, like, she's summing up the things that happen in this chapter and saying, okay, so basically these are the lessons that this child learned, or the lessons that you as the reader can learn from what happened in the story here. Or, like, the mother in the story will be very clearly, with a dialogue with her children or whatever, will be very clearly presenting some kind of moral teaching or truth or something like that. And also the children's dialogue between each other and the things that happen, the whole aspect of the story, like, they're always learning lessons and they're very overt. It's very much outlined as part of the story. It's the whole point of the story. It's that these moral lessons are taught to the students or to the person reading it, the children reading it especially, and it's the whole point. It's not just a story with a theme about something. It's a fable, almost a fable with a moral point to it. So there's nothing, morally wrong or reprehensible or bad about that sort of writing. In the case of Louisa May Alcott, the more mature of a reader I am, the more I would disagree with some aspects of her particular brand of morality, because there's a very strong element of self-righteousness in it, and a very strong aspect of, you can be a good person if you try hard enough. And theologically, I feel like that is very weak. I know. The truth is, the Bible gospel truth is, that none of us can be good apart from the gospel, apart from the saving work of Jesus Christ, apart from his blood on the cross. There is no way that we can rise to human perfection without that saving grace. We cannot make ourselves be good. Now, can we, by the grace of God, incorporate habits and build disciplines into our lives? Yes. Yes, we can. But we cannot be wholly good people without the grace of God. And there's no grace. There's no, in Louisa May Alcott's writing, there's no grace. It's always a try harder sort of thing. And there's never any mention of the work of Christ or the work of the gospel in a person's life, changing them and transforming them. Now, she's not setting out to write Christian books per se, so that's not necessarily surprising. However, she is definitely writing moral instruction. It's very obvious from the tone of her stories. So it lacks, for me, it lacks. It's not ideal in that sense, I guess. It's not terrible, it's not horrible, it's not bad, but it's lacking and it's not ideal. The primary reason why I dislike when a book has strong moralistic overtones, or when a book is like really moralizing about something, is because I feel like the ideal art, the ideal literature, the ideal story is a balance of truth and goodness and beauty. So you can have all of the truth and all of the goodness, which, you know, Louisa May Alcott has. She's lacking a little in the truth area, but definitely the goodness is there. You know, she's upholding good ideals and good morals and good behavior. But the beauty part is lacking because she doesn't let the story speak for itself. She constructs it in such a way that the moral is extremely obvious, and then she hammers it home in the narrative in case you didn't catch it. And so it becomes more of a lecture than a story. And that's where the moralizing becomes problematic in terms of it being good literature. Good literature as art, as a thing of beauty, in my opinion, and not just my opinion, because I didn't come to this conclusion on my own. This is something I have learned over time. Beautiful literature, a beautiful, well-told story will have a strong moral center to it. It will have strong thematic elements of good versus evil, and it will extol what is good, and it will condemn what is evil. But the best and most beautiful stories will do that in just the unfolding of the story itself, the way that it's constructed. And there may be some more directly spoken words to help shape it, but it's a fine line. And I feel like Louisa May Alcott consistently crosses the line, and a lot of authors of her time did as well. They consistently crossed the line and made the story entirely about the moral, and they made sure you understood what the moral was. It became more, it was more of a fable than a beautifully told story or a well-told story. So it's just kind of a different thing, I guess. And to me, it's not enjoyable, because it's the difference between listening to your parent lecture you about something and just learning from your parent's example or from your teacher. You know, the teacher is lecturing on a subject or the teacher is demonstrating something. It's the difference in the way that it's presented as to whether it is more or less appealing. So that's the difference. And why I point out when I see it in literature, because I don't like it. It's not appealing to me. One other thing that I want to say about that is that there is a place for that. I enjoyed these books by Louisa May Alcott when I was younger, and I learned valuable lessons from them that stuck with me, that shaped me to become who I am. It's not a complete loss for me. And also, I will say, like, let's think about Jesus, you know, who was the greatest teacher, and the lessons that he taught in parables. And many times, most of the time, when he told a parable, he just let it stand for itself. He spoke in metaphors. The whole Bible has so many symbols and metaphors. Even the stories that we can take literally, that we believe literally, are also symbolic and pictures of other things, if we have eyes to see that. All of Scripture is pointing to Christ and pointing to the gospel, but it's very often in metaphorical ways that are not spelled out in the text anywhere. It's just, the more time you spend reading it and thinking about it, the more you see it. And God gives you the eyes to see that, the picture that he's unfolding throughout the story, developing over time. And then the parables that Jesus told, same thing. Sometimes he just told them and he let it stand. He let the metaphor stand, and people who understood it, they understood it. They didn't understand it, then they didn't understand it. And then you have the times when the disciples specifically asked him, okay, so we know you're trying to say something here, but we don't understand what. Can you explain it? So then he would explain it, and he would expound on what the different metaphors meant and what he was trying to tell in the parable. And sometimes he just straight up told them, you know, okay, so by this, I mean this, and by that, I mean that. So there's a place for all of it. There is a place for sometimes the moral needs to be spelled out. It needs to be straight up in the text. There is a place for that. I don't think it's totally horrible, terrible, bad example of literature. So that's why I still read Louisa May Alcott. I can't read a lot at a time because it starts to, I don't know, it's just not as enjoyable, you know. It's not as pleasurable for me. It feels more like scolding than a pleasant story, right? But there's a place for it, and I enjoyed it when I was younger. And then there's a place, you know, for the more elegantly told story, for the fairy tales that don't spell out the metaphors that are there or the symbolism that is there, but they are there nonetheless. And if you take the time to think about it, you will see the parallels and the metaphors and the things that are taking place in the fairy tales. So there's a place for all of it. But I think the best form of literature is when the author is able to communicate the truth and the goodness and the beauty with all of those evenly blended, and not forsaking either one of those three elements. It's all a beautiful combined whole to tell the story. So that is a really long answer to that question, but hopefully it makes more sense where I'm coming from when I talk about what I see in books as being like moralizing or preaching. I think there are two categories of books that very, very often fall into this realm, and I still read them both and I enjoy them both, but they definitely can have this aspect to that, and that is Victorian literature and Christian fiction. Not all Christian fiction authors, not all Victorian authors, you know, but those have a tendency to fall off the rails into the moralizing and or the preaching, instead of just letting the story speak for itself and letting the story be beautiful on its own and conveying the truth on its own without having to scold and lecture the point into the reader. So that's that. I just wanted to clarify those thoughts and see if that makes sense. So let me know in the comments your thoughts about any of that, if you've ever thought about it, and what you think about books that have strong preachy overtones, that are trying to, that have a lecturing tone that is hammering home the point that the story is trying to make, and how you feel about that, if it ever bothers you, if you notice it, if you like to have it in your stories, if you think there's a place for it or not. Let me know in the comments. And this is already really long, so this is going to be like a long weekly reading vlog. It's only Monday, and we're at 25 minutes here. Cool. All right, well, I will see you next time. Bye. Hello, it's Wednesday afternoon, and I have just a few minutes, so I'm going to film this clip really quick with a couple of updates. First of all, I stopped to get a friend of mine a birthday present, and it is the most random birthday present ever. First of all, a gift card. Secondly, a Spanish cheese tapas sampler. So my friend is carnivore, but she eats some cheeses. And so I think that she should be able to eat those cheeses. We'll find out. What was I thinking? I should have put the gift card in the card, but I already sealed that envelope, so that's not happening. Anyways, don't be like me, guys. Don't be like me. Think ahead. Plan ahead. And then I got this little pot of succulents. Aren't they so cute? Now, in my house, I know you're supposed to be able to keep succulents alive. Like, I have once I did keep them alive for quite some time. That was once. I've tried many times. There is a child making interesting noises over there. Anyway, so that is my gift for my friend, and I'm going to go give it to her in a minute here. But first I wanted to mention that I finished reading Jack and Jill yesterday. So, it was all the nostalgia. I really loved reading that as a child. I read it several times, and I just loved the main characters, Jack and Jill. And I love their story, how they have a tragic accident at the beginning, and then it's about their healing process, and then it's about their friendships and the hijinks they get up to and the things that they learn in the course of the year following the accident. So it follows them almost entirely through a year. And it's a little bit coming of age story to an extent. Some of their, like Jack's older brother Frank and his set of friends are all turning like 17 years old during the course of the story. And so they're like making plans for their future and that kind of stuff. And then you have Jack and Jill and their set of friends who are a little bit younger. I guess they're probably like maybe 14, 15.
in the course of the story. And there's just a lot of lessons that they learn and a lot of growing experiences that they go through in the process of dealing with the aftermath of this accident, but then just other like daily life stuff. During the course of the story, they go to the seaside, which is fun because it's a glimpse of late 19th century vacation at the sea, which as an adult, I found that super fascinating. As a kid, I kind of just took it for granted, I guess. But as an adult, I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like getting this glimpse of how people vacationed. And I know that Louisa May Alcott would take, I think, her nieces and nephews to the sea later in her life for vacation. So she's drawing on her own experience there. Another cool thing is that there is the characters that they meet there include these women. One who is a physician, and so she gives Jack's mom some medical advice regarding Jill's continued recovery from the accident. And then there is another woman there. I don't know if she's named, but she's an educator. And so she also gives Jack's mom some advice about education, which very much aligns with like sort of Charlotte Mason ideals. And I'm not sure that Louisa May Alcott was drawing on Charlotte Mason. I think she's probably drawing on her father's educational ideas. But I think that they would correspond very closely to like a Charlotte Mason kind of idea. Anyway, so then when they get back home from the sea and they're about to start another school year, Jack's mom is like, oh, actually, we're going to homeschool this year. So that's kind of cool. If you're looking for a story that features homeschoolers. Now, there's not a great deal of this story that takes place in that environment, but because it happens kind of in the last 25% of the story, but it's still really cool. I thought that was a neat part of the story that I didn't particularly remember. And I know that Louisa May Alcott features, like, education is a big theme for her, probably because of her father's influence, and at different times in her life, she was an educator herself. So I think it was important to her. And she definitely had some non-mainstream ideas about education. So those show up a lot in her books. So anyway, it was interesting and a fun read. I enjoyed it. I already talked at length in my last clip about my thoughts about, the preachiness of it and how Louisa May Alcott had a tendency to kind of hammer home her points that she was making about education and the moral growth and character of the children in the story. The only other thing that I would add to it is that I think one of the biggest things that makes me not enjoy it as much is that it is unrealistic in a significant way, in that the children immediately change their behavior, like permanently, based on the context of one like wise conversation with their parent or caregiver or whatever. And this happens a lot in Alcott books. And that's just completely unrealistic. I mean, it may work better for the story, but it's just completely unrealistic. And in my experience, or maybe it's just that all the children I have met in my life are just extra hard-headed. But in my experience, it takes a person much more than one wise conversation with an adult to effect change. It happens over a course of time. It might give them pause. It might give them something to think about. It might be a seed that's planted that bears fruit later on. But it's very rare for an adult and a child to have a conversation. The adult wisely and graciously imparts the wisdom. Child wisely and graciously receives it, acts on it, and it changes them and their character forever. And that's kind of how it happens in Alcott's books. And I think that's like one of the biggest things that frustrates me, is that unrealistic aspect of it. And clearly she's only trying to make a point about a certain sort of behavior, and she's trying to teach the children who are reading this book a lesson in a gentle way. So that's good. And when I was a kid, it didn't bother me at all. So I think there's definitely a place where I think children can benefit from this kind of moral instruction. And I don't think it bothers them as much as it bothers us as adults, because they're used to it. They're used to adults giving them instruction. They're used to the sort of lecturing, if you will. Whereas as adults, we're kind of beyond that. So it kind of makes the novel more geared towards children and more appropriate for children and less of interest to an adult. But I enjoyed it for nostalgia's sake, and I think it's a fantastic book for children coming of age. 9, 10, 11, 12. The children in the book are a little bit older, but I feel like they're also very innocent, especially by today's standards. And so I think that younger children would appreciate it more than children who are actually that age. I think children who are actually 15, 16, 17 years old, like the kids in the story, I think that they would probably be at a stage where they would be bored by it. So I think it's better for younger children and kind of giving them something to look up to and something to aspire to. And so that's who I would recommend. It's that sweet spot there. I think it's really perfectly written for, and just a fun story. I like it almost as much as Little Women, not quite. Little Women is definitely like in a class of its own, but Jack and Jill is definitely right up there with Joe's Boys and Little Men, and I don't know about the other ones because it's been a long time since I've read them, but I definitely enjoy Jack and Jill. I'm trying to catch up on the Count of Monte Cristo because I had set it aside for a few days so I could focus on finishing up my March reads, but I picked it back up again today, and what I really love about this one is that it just keeps moving. Like, Alexandre Dumas does not let grass grow underneath his feet, and he does not waste any words. This is just, it's action. We're moving from scene to scene, from action to action. He doesn't sit and stew on anything. And in fact, you know, when you go from one chapter to the next, you know, a period of time has probably elapsed. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's the next day. Sometimes it's immediately following, but sometimes it's like, you know, the next month or whatever. Like, he's just moving to the next scene of action, and it helps, even though it's a really long book, it helps things to move along quickly. Now, I am still in the first third of it. I have not gotten through that yet. So I can't say that that's going to be the permanent situation in this story, but I'm liking that. I'm liking the pacing so far. It doesn't make it feel like a slog to read through. So I've not picked up any of my April books yet. It's April 2nd, and I haven't done that yet. I meant to today, but I didn't bring them with me. So unfortunately, I won't get to any of them probably until tomorrow. But what shall I pick up next? I don't know. Obviously, I want to pick up Pride and Prejudice, and definitely will be doing that. I also need to start some buddy reads, but the one book I don't have in hand yet, the David Brainerd book, and I need to contact Charlene and see when she wants to start reading the Ladies Guide to whatever, Misadventures, Marvels, whatever. That one can happen at any point this month. We'll see when she wants to do that. So other than that, I think the flower book that was settled on was The First Ladies. So I will definitely pick up that one. I'm going to try and get A Fall of Marigolds also, I think, by Susan Meissner in there. So that is what I'm currently reading, what I just finished, what I have on deck, and I will see you all next time. Bye.
Hello, it is Friday evening and finished up a week of work and ready for the weekend. We have busy plans for this weekend. I don't want to say big plans, but definitely busy plans. My husband and I tonight have a little bit of a date night planned of sorts. So tomorrow, our children with the youth group at their church are doing an escape room, but they're not going to an escape room like an official one they have to pay for. The youth leaders have made the escape room at the church. And so they're going to test it out on some adults tonight. And so my husband and I were invited to be some guinea pigs for this experiment. And so we're going to meet everybody and have some dinner first, and then we're going to go and do the escape room. So that promises to be fun. I've never done an escape room myself. The rest of my family has, but I've never done one. So it'll be fun. So those are our evening plans, and that's what they're doing tomorrow. Tomorrow am planning on going to a big library book sale. At least they advertise it as being big. I've heard that it's big. I don't know. It's also about an hour away from me, which is, I wouldn't normally go that far, but the ladies at my church are going also out to that area, but they're going to a flea market around there. And I decided I would rather go to the book sale than the flea market. But then after that, they're going to meet at Cracker Barrel for lunch and then go to another area to do some shopping, possibly those who want to. So I will meet them up at Cracker Barrel and possibly for the shopping, and potentially maybe up with my sister after that if the timing works out. We'll see. I don't know, but it looks to be like a long and busy day tomorrow. So I thought I would film my last clip for this week just to finish updating on what I am working on and reading and what I've done. So beginning with the Count of Monte Cristo, I am about a third of the way through now and enjoying it. And I've gotten back on pace. I had taken a break for a few days, but I think I'm more or less caught up to where I need to be to keep at the same pace of reading for the rest of a couple of months, and definitely still enjoying it. So a couple chapters ago, it definitely took an interesting turn that I was not expecting. One that involved hashish, which is like a particular, it's like a part of the marijuana plant, but apparently a pretty potent part. I had heard of it, like I was aware of it, but I didn't know much about it. So I looked it up and was reading about it. It was very interesting. And the preparation that they take in this book is like was popular in Egypt at that time, may still be for all I know. Anyway, the way they served it, and like they just ate it by the spoonful, but it brought on like hallucinations and stuff and these dreams. And the character whose point of view we are reading at that time in the story, who is not the main character, so we're getting his perspective. And so he describes, not in super great detail, thankfully, but in detail enough, his hallucinations and his dreams and his visions after he takes this hashish. And let's just say I didn't need to read that. I didn't need to read that. I'm not sure if that's one of those things, because I have never taken an impairing sort of drug before, or like a drug that makes you high or gives you hallucinations. I've never done any of that. And I know that surprises you, right? Anyway, I don't know much about it, but I wonder if it's the sort of thing that, like, whatever your propensity would be, that this type of drug would just enhance that, you know, like take your brain that direction, a direction that it would go of its own accord anyway. It just gets magnified and made extremely weird by the effects of the hallucinating drug. So, like, you know, a person who is prone to think on certain things, like that's where their brain would go if they're hallucinating. I don't know how it works. Is that how it works? Does anybody know? I don't know. I'm clueless about this sort of stuff. Very naive. Anyway, so yeah, those dreams were very interesting. And I didn't need to read them. And also, I think if people have those sort of dreams, they shouldn't tell other people about them, because we don't want to know. We don't want to know about it. So that was very interesting. I'm not sure if hashish makes another appearance later on in the story. But it was certainly an interesting interlude that I was not expecting by any means. So here we go, forward in Count of Monte Cristo. And I think I'm probably at that intersection that maybe some people say is not as interesting. And I still feel like it's still pretty fast paced. Like our main character, Edmond Dantes, his story isn't making much forward progress, but there's still like new things happening. It's still interesting. It's still like you never know what's going to happen when you turn the page. There's always something new around every corner, and you're going to be surprised. So enjoying that. For April, we are reading Pride and Prejudice in the Jane Austen birthday celebration. So I've already picked this up and started it and really enjoying it. I've only read the first 2 chapters, but can I just say, I love the first chapter. This is like one of the best first chapters in literature. It sticks out to me in part because it's so great, but in part because I've read it several times and I'm very familiar with it. So that's part of why it sticks out to me. But I do think it stands out among the rest of first chapters in literature. I love the dialogue between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet. It's just perfect. Like the whole first chapter is just so perfectly crafted, sets the tone for the story, introduces you to the characters, and has just the right amount of irony and information. it's setting the stage and it's laying the groundwork, but you're already pulled into the story and what's going to happen. And you have an idea of certain directions that the story might go. So I love the first chapter here. Now, I was going to listen to this in tandem, so read and listen, with the audiobook of The Cultured Bumpkin. And I do love his performance of it. I really enjoyed it. But I found that it was not word for word exact with the book, and at least the one that's on YouTube. There may be like a paid version that doesn't have anything cut out. But there seem to have been some parts cut out. And I don't mind like the occasional misplaced word or, added word or whatever. Like, that would be fine. But there are whole paragraphs that were removed in the audio book version that's on YouTube. So there may be a paid version somewhere that's not like that. I don't know. But I decided not to do that. As much as I enjoyed his performance, I think it would be better either to listen to that entirely or just read this. So I'm opting with reading this because I just want to read the annotations in this one. So another time, another day, I'll listen to his audio recording of it. I've also started reading this with Hope at Hopefully Books, The Life and Diary of David Brainerd, and I'm not that far, only a couple pages in, where our plan is to read the first 2 parts, or chapters, if you will, this week. So I need to work on that over this weekend. I was amazed. We get some introductory background biographical information about David Brainerd at the very beginning, about his family history. And he has quite the background, quite the heritage as far as who his forefathers were. They were faithful Christians, ministers, and also officials and members of the nobility and stuff. Like, he had some very interesting forebears, came from a nice, strong line of people. So that's about as far as I've gotten, though. I have just started the part where his diary begins. So I have not made much progress with that, but I will hopefully make significant progress. Now, that is a Christian nonfiction, but it's not one that I already had. So I have a shelf of physically owned Christian nonfiction TBR that I have to work through because it's just too many. And I need to read them or get rid of them. So I'm working really hard on that, and I aim to have one in progress at all times. Even if it takes me, if I just read a little bit here and there, as I have time. It's not necessarily prioritized among other books that I have going on, but I just want to always have one in progress. So I picked up this one, The Calvary Road by Roy, I'm not sure how to say his last name, Hession. And I thought this would be a good one to read with Easter coming up. So I haven't started it yet, but this one is definitely one that I'm going to be reading through the month of April. And it's not very long, so it should not take much time. That's the other reason why I picked that one. Other than that, I will be picking up early next week, probably the Ladies' Guide to Marvels and Misadventures, that one. But I'm reading that with Charlene. We're going to start next week. So I kind of had wanted to pick up something else in between now and then, like a shorter read, but doesn't necessarily make sense. I need to finish reading the 2 chapters in this before I do that. So this will be my priority. And if I have time this weekend after I read that and maybe a little more Pride and Prejudice, I might pick up a quick read, a fun read over the weekend. We'll see what happens, and you'll find out next week because that won't be in this week's video. So that is my reading life this week. So now I need to upload this and get these videos edited and ready to go live so that you can watch them on Sunday morning. And I will see you all next time. Bye. Okay, it is time to spin for another channel to follow. Who will it be today? And it's Book Talks with Mrs. Thomas. So go ahead and check out her channel and subscribe to it. Also, I know recently she published a devotional or Bible study, so you may want to check that out and look that up and see if that would be of interest to you. So go subscribe to Book Talks with Mrs. Thomas, and I will see you next time.